Good evening, everyone. My name is Luis Lopez, and I'm an investigator with the Westminster Police Department. Thank you for joining us this evening. Um, I will be moderating this off camera, kind of behind the scenes. We're going to have a presentation tonight about our co-responder program. Our presenters will be investigator Sherry Spotke and co-responder Nora Sullivan. The way this is going to work is we're going to have a presentation first, and then as soon as we're done with the presentation, we will open it up for questioning. However, if you think of some questions during the presentation, please type them on the screen. I will see those, and then we can address them in the order they were received. Out of respect for your time and our time, we will try to end promptly at 7. Any questions that we don't get to, we will answer later via email. We have all of your email addresses. So again, we're going to be having a presentation tonight on our co-responder program. Investigator Spotke, go ahead.
Hi, thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you spending some time with us so that we can explain what we feel are two very, very important programs in the police department. I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about our CIT, Crisis Intervention Teams training program to you. It's the training that officers receive on mental health. And then I'm going to turn it over to Nora so that she can talk a little bit more about the piece that we've recently added, our co-responder clinician program, that is really exciting and really is a benefit to both us and the citizens of Westminster. So our officers here at Westminster are trained in crisis intervention. It's a 40-hour training course. It's a pass-fail, not just an attend and get a certificate type training. Officers receive training on mental health conditions, learning disorders, and how to interact with people who are in those crises at the time that we may contact them. Because a lot of times we get phone calls from family members where children are out of control, or maybe their loved one has wandered away from home, or somebody who just simply is in a mental health crisis, and we respond. We're the first ones to respond. We, in Adams County, is where we do our program for crisis intervention, and we also do that with Community Reach Center, which is where Nora is part of. And they help us learn about the learning disabilities, the mental health conditions, and really give us the instruction on their expertise in the field of study. We then bring in actors during that 40-hour course who have studied these mental health conditions and learning disabilities, and we work through them on typical problems that we're seeing on the road so that officers can have a real-life experience with how to talk to people after they've learned the techniques and exactly the nuances of those mental health and learning disability conditions. So the 40-hour class, again, is Monday through Friday. It's pretty intensive. It's from 8 to 5. And like, again, it's not just you go and receive a certificate. You have to participate. You have to pass. If you don't have the skill set, or you don't actively participate, or you're not getting the concepts, we don't just automatically pass a police officer and give them that certification. Throughout the 40-hour class, officers will learn active listening skills, so how to just take a minute and listen to what people are telling them. They learn communication de-escalation, and this is in addition to the training that officers receive in their departments. This is specific to mental health, learning disability conditions. They learn about suicide and suicide by cop, mood and thought disorders. We talk about elder issues. A lot of times we deal with our elder community, and those issues are going to be different, obviously, than say, a child. We learn about children in crisis, substance use, and how it affects people's not only mental state in a clear mind, but when they have a learning disability or a functional disability or a mental health condition. We talk about anxiety and phobias, personality disorders, developmental disabilities, and even excited delirium, and how officers can verbally de-escalate and work through these problems with our consumers. Every day, the officers are required to do a scenario based on what they learned that day. So if the first day we're learning about active listening and communication de-escalation, the afternoon scenarios will be focused on those topics. The officers have to use those techniques, active listening and de-escalation, to resolve or come to a resolution about the situation that the actor is in that day. Again, it's very intensive. It's hard for these officers to stand up in front of their peers, to be judged by coaches, to be graded upon their behavior and their interaction with people. But if they can't do it right in a classroom setting and practice those techniques, then we know they're certainly not going to be able to take it to the road and somebody who's in a real life crisis. So we work through these scenarios with the officers. We stop them. We give them suggestions. Maybe this didn't work. You said this, and that wasn't the best thing to say. So it's a really intensive 40-hour course that they go through. The Westminster Police Department has a huge buy-in in this program. 147 out of our 198 officers, which is just a little bit over 74% of our officers, are trained in crisis intervention. That's a phenomenal number, and not all departments have that participation. We regularly send officers to the class, which occurs about 2 times a year, and we always make sure we have officers attending that. It's important because these skills translate into our community, and I'll be the first one to tell you that at first, when I was trained in 2004, I wasn't exactly sure how this was going to be important to me as a police officer, how I was going to make this work. The first time I had a call where I was on it with somebody who was mentally ill, I thought, well, let's see if this stuff really works. I'd been through the 40-hour class, and sure enough, I used the techniques and the de-escalation and the communication that they provided me, and it actually worked, and I was able to safely get someone transported to the hospital. And that's when I became a firm believer in the crisis intervention. In addition to our officers being certified, we have 5 dispatchers who are trained in dispatch crisis intervention. So from the minute that that call comes in, either from a family member or from one of the consumers who's in a mental health, crisis, or someone with a learning disability that's maybe lost, it starts with our dispatchers, and they're able to start working through that crisis with our citizens. In order to put these classes on, we have to have somebody who teaches the class, and they are called course directors. In Adams County, we currently have 3 course directors, and all of them come from the Westminster Police Department. That's how invested in this program we are. And then we have 19 coaches. Those coaches take those students through and help them with the techniques, help them practice with those actors on a daily basis, on the daily basis in the class. Again, give them instructions, give them how to be better, what better techniques to use. So the Westminster Police Department, Chief Carlson and command staff is vested in the CIT program. That gives the officers the ability to go out and deal with a lot of these mental health calls and be successful at getting people treatment and into, whether it be a substance abuse program or a mental health situation at a hospital, provide them those resources. But we even thought we need to take this one step further. And in 2018, we applied for a grant that we received in January of 2019 for 2 co-responder clinicians. These clinicians are housed here in the police department with us. They work directly out of the police department. And this grant was given to us by the Colorado Department of Human Services Office of Behavioral Health. Again, we received the grant in the beginning of 2019, January, and then COVID hit. So it took us a little while to get the co-responders here and trained. We don't just send them out to calls. We want them to be safe. We want them to understand why we proactively approach situations safely and how to do that with us. So Nora and Emily came on, and they spent quite a bit of time with officers going on ride-alongs and just seeing how the officers responded to calls and interacted with citizens. And then they actually began taking calls and helping us in July of 2019. So they work 7 days a week, so there's coverage 7 days a week. Now there's only 2 of them right now, so that coverage is not 24 hours a day, but they are here 7 days a week, about mid-morning to mid-evening to help us. And then any of those calls that we use our crisis intervention skills on, we refer to them for follow-up the next day or a couple days later, depending on the severity of the call. So the program is set up so that individuals from crisis don't unnecessarily go to jail or get into the criminal justice system as a result of their behavior. A lot of times their behavior is a result of their learning disability or their mental health condition. And so instead of putting them in jail, Nora works, and she'll explain this a little bit more in detail about how she works to get them into programs and treatment so that their mental illness doesn't exacerbate the problem for them. As far as our statistics, since we started compiling them in 2017, we have significantly seen our mental health welfare checks go up. In 2017, we responded to about 2,900 calls, and in the year 2020, just last year, we were over 3,500. So as you can see, we all know that the mental health crisis and issues that are going on, not just in the city of Westminster, but across the state and the nation, are increasing. So by adding our co-responders, they can go out and deal with a lot of those calls with us or for us, and they complete a lot of follow-up so that we don't keep responding back out. They keep people into their programs and on their medications and stuff. So Nora, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your job looks like?
My job is always exciting. I never know what I'm going to be called out to do, but the span of what I do is I respond to anybody who's in a behavioral crisis, which can mean they're upset, they're suicidal, they're having this reaction to some life event, or they may have a mental illness. And so my role is to go and respond with police when there's an anticipated need for, behavioral health support. And my overarching goal is to really smooth out the process so that people understand the nature of what the person is going through, so I can communicate that with police who arrive on scene, with the fire department who are sometimes in charge of transporting that person to an emergency room if necessary, and then kind of follow up with family members and that individual to make sure they get ongoing care. So that's the overarching goal, and so I can be out, sometimes we don't know what the nature of the person's issue is. It could be a substance use disorder or a mental health disorder. We don't always know. In any case, I'm able to respond and kind of further assess that individual. So the resources I can offer people are, ongoing mental health treatment at a community reach center or Jefferson Center for Mental Health, or to point people in the right direction if they have private insurance and get them into see a private care provider. And so that's kind of what I do overall. And even if I'm not called upon on scene, if it happens overnight or if it's not something that's anticipated, officers will often send me an email to let me know, hey, this individual turns out had a mental health crisis or a substance use crisis. And I can either work with that individual directly or their family members. One of the things we've been working on that's particular to substance abuse is getting people who are in danger of hurting themselves or others due to a substance use disorder on an emergency commitment, which, it's a mandatory kind of treatment at a detox facility. And then a family member can apply for an involuntary commitment process, which can get that person into treatment for 3 months or more. And what's nice about that is that involuntary programs turn out just as successfully as voluntary programs for substance use. And so a lot of people who kind of aren't happy about being mandated to treatment actually are thankful by the end of that process for getting sober and able to improve their lives. So
I think one of the points that Nora hit upon that's important is not only did she provide services for the person who may be in crisis, but that family as well, whether that be parents or a spouse or a roommate, because that's the person who is in that situation with that person and can certainly help us help them. So I think that that's a big part of Nora's role as well, and our other co-responder. One question you guys may have, it may come up, it may not, but what did this look like through COVID? I mean, we're all kind of still dealing with that. So we had arranged for video conferencing if necessary, but we didn't have to use that. And we haven't had to use that yet. So Nora and Emily have both been able to respond to the scenes. And I think it's important to understand that an officer can ask for a co-responder to come out to the scene with them, either prior to going to the call, if they have knowledge of history at the home, or the call just sounds like maybe this might be a case where there's some mental health issues involved. They can ask for the co-responder once they're on scene, or sometimes the co-responder will be dispatched immediately if the dispatchers on the front end know that the call might include some kind of learning disability person or a consumer who's in a crisis or a mental health situation. Again, the biggest goal is the de-escalation, the stabilization, not necessarily charging people criminally for things that may be caused by an underlying condition, but getting them the resources and the help that they need. That's the biggest goal of the program. Working with our municipal courts and potentially our county courts to divert them out of the criminal justice system and into the proper mental health programs is a big component.
And we actually recently had a conversation with the interim judge of the municipal court here in Westminster just about that, and about how to get people into treatment as opposed to jail, as treatment is really what's going to help that person stay out of the criminal justice system in the long run.
Right. The clinicians can also work with school staff on children who may either have mental health issues or potentially substance abuse issues where maybe prior expulsion was the only option for those students. They can work through the resources and the mental health system to get those kids into treatment. Right now, we work with Community Reach Center, which is our partner in all of this, and that they're a huge resource to us. They're available to you as the public on a private type consultation, so you don't have to come to the police department to be able to get help from them. They're located in our city, which is also helpful. But I think it's important to understand that this program is in its infancy here, and we hope to grow this program. We're exploring options to expand our service and our availability. Right now, we talked about, yes, they're here 7 days, but they're not here 24 hours. So what does that look like moving forward? Do we need more clinicians? I can tell you certainly that they're busy and they go on a lot of calls. We're looking at other programs. You may have heard of different programs in different cities, but I have to understand that there's not one single response that we can put into place because of all the variances of types of issues that we deal with. We certainly don't want to send our co-responders out to a dangerous situation where maybe a weapon's involved. We would obviously go with them, but then there may be times where bringing a police officer to the situation escalates it. So there's a lot of room for us to grow this program, and we're definitely looking at that and how we can make it better. We currently coordinate with the Westminster Fire Department for medical transports on issues that we deal with related to mental health. It's much more calming and relaxing for a person to go in an ambulance than in the back of a patrol car a lot of times. So there's been a lot of thought and work and research put into this program to get it started and to get it going, and it's been successful. The officers are completely grateful and use the heck out of these guys, and I know that they have a lot of work. So definitely looking for more opportunities and options and growing this program. Not only from our CIT, we want our officers still trained for when we don't have a co-responder available. It's important that they are able to de-escalate and calm situations down and recognize situations where maybe there is a mental health piece, but also continue to grow and develop our co-responder program, because we've seen just how successful it's been, and it's less than a year so far. So I think that's kind of all the information we wanted to provide to you. We certainly want to take your questions and answer specific things that you might have for us.
Thank you very much. So our first question is from Parker Brown. His question is, so there's always a dispatcher on shift who is trained in crisis management. The question was answered by Sergeant Matarazzo. He stated, due to bidding shifts, scheduling, and other staffing needs, for example, training new dispatchers, there may be occasion when a CIT certified dispatcher is not working, but all our dispatchers are trained in techniques to handle crisis calls. Would you like to add anything to that?
No, I just think it's important to recognize that those dispatchers do a phenomenal job. Obviously, we'd love to have them closer to 100% trained, just like we'd like to have all the officers. But again, just due to staffing issues and training, that's not where we're at. But we'll definitely work on that. But they do have those skills to recognize and let the officers and the co-responder clinicians know when mental health may be a factor in the call.
And also, I sometimes get calls transferred by dispatch when there is a mental health crisis involved in a call, and so that, you know, we can get more of a picture and ask the right kind of questions to see what that individual is needing.
Hi everybody, I'm Trevor. I'm the one that was answering some of the questions behind the scenes, Sherry and Nora. I just wanted to jump on real quick. And one, it's a great opportunity to thank Parker for that question. It's a good time to be able to convey the value that our dispatchers have. They answer those 911 calls when somebody's dealing with crisis. If they are calling or their family members calling and really is looking for a calm voice on the other end of that phone, and that's kind of where it starts oftentimes, is somebody is dealing with crisis or a family member and they need somebody calm to help get them that help and that resource. So our dispatchers do such a fantastic job. One thing I'd like Nora and touch on a little bit is qualifications. What does it take to be a co-responder clinician? Some of your training, your background, maybe some of Emily, really gives them perspective on how much value we have to have co-responders going with the officers and helping.
Well, I've been learning, even though I have lots of letters behind my name, I've been learning more. It takes a lot of humility, that you, even with all the training you have, you don't know what that individual's situation is, and it's very important to not pretend to know before you really understand, to ask the right questions and allow that person to educate you. Aside from that, I mean, I have training, and Emily has training. We both have training in assessment and really understanding the nature of a crisis, how to distinguish whether it's a mental health disorder or a substance use disorder behind that situation, or a combination thereof, so that we can get the person to the right place for treatment. We don't want to send somebody with a substance use disorder to a mental health facility. We want to get them to the right place. So I think there's that. I value in my job right now, my marriage and family therapy skills, and really working on interventions with families and how to manage crisis in the future, and also what's contributing in the kind of systemic environment to maybe that person's crisis, and how to tweak that a little bit to safety plan and to support that individual in crisis. And then I have a license in addictions counseling as well, which helps me understand, has educated me quite a bit on addictions and you know, how that's a brain disorder and how to better treat that in a less, you know, in a more productive way, rather than, you know, saying you shouldn't use drugs, that kind of thing. It's a little bit more complex than that. And then I think having a lot of background in trauma, and that, you know, how trauma contributes to mental illness as well as substance use disorders, I think is important to understand. A lot of people are just trying to deal with pain, and it's not easy. So those are the things that are helpful to me. And I know Emily has vast resources as well. She's worked in inpatient psychiatric facilities, currently works in an emergency room assessing folks, and so has dealt with a lot of the same types of
Tremendous humility. You're not fully disclosing the tremendous resume you have and the licensing and the degrees and that kind of thing. It's not just a training program that you or Emily have gone through to be capable of providing such a tremendous service. That's fantastic. And Sherry had talked about the CIT program. And I think one question a lot of people have, why don't we incorporate CIT into the academy? Why do we have officers start to get acclimated to the job before we as a department would send them to become certified in CIT?
That's a great question, and it's one that we have explored. I think there's really two prongs to it. You know, when you first come in, And I'm a perfect example. I grew up in a law enforcement family. I have uncles, and my dad retired after 40 years. But mental health was always a stigma. You didn't talk about it. You didn't respond to calls. The very first call that I went on, it was a call of a woman who was in a mental health crisis in a really nice home, and she thought that her wedding planner was in the heating vents, listening in on their conversations. And I just stood there and I had no idea. I was baffled that there were people who might be our neighbors or citizens in our community that were suffering. So there's a learning curve. We get a lot of young officers who haven't experienced life experience. They also have to learn how to respond to calls, to talk to people before we can give them a talking class, right? So they need to go out and learn how to be police officers, how to be safe, how to recognize when there are elements of a crime, but they have to learn how to talk to people. This is a speaking communications class, basically, is what it boils down to. And it takes a little bit of time to develop that skill. So if we send officers through this class when they're in the academy, it's all hypothetical and kind of in this world that may not be understood to them. So when they're on the street, when they go through their field training, when they've had a little bit of time under their belt and they respond to some of these calls, they see other officers handle them, they recognize some of the elements or what they're dealing with, then they're more prepared to go into this class and understand when we talk to them about somebody who may be hearing voices. Okay, I've seen that on the street. I know what that looks like now. Now I can apply this skill, and it makes it more real life to them versus just kind of a scenario that they may not know exists.
That's good, I guess, to have that background and understanding. It makes the training that much more valuable from a law enforcement perspective, that they have a little bit of experience and exposure, so they may gain more from that training and then be in a position to better apply that. 2020 was crazy for all of us. COVID descended and really just upheaved what the normal was for everybody. This program really, a commander and a deputy chief started in 2018. So a little clarification, because we've lost track of time in COVID years, that a commander and a deputy chief, super passionate about this program, started doing research and proactively developing and designing what a co-responder program for Westminster would look like. The application for that grant actually occurred in 2019, and then we received that grant and were able to start the program in 2020. So I know Sherry mentioned 2019 as the start date of that, and we've lost track of time. I know working with Sherry that the two of us do that all the time. It's one of those, is it 2021? Is it 2020? To think that we've been in a COVID realm for such a long period of time is tremendous, but we're so excited about it. We're enthusiastic about what's to come, because just what we've experienced, the enthusiasm that we see from the officers, because there's frustration there. I think we can talk to officers that respond to these calls and they feel a little incapable of providing some service. They want to help, but they don't have necessarily as many options as Nora and Emily do. So that is fantastic for us. We really want to encourage those that are in attendance. We're not seeing a whole lot in the chat or in the questions. So we really want to give you the opportunity to have this be a conversation. We've shared a lot of information and hope that has stirred quite a few questions. So we would like you to join us with those questions or conversation. I think one question Sherry and Nora can answer is, how does a family member or an individual that may suffer from a mental crisis get a hold of us on the front end? Maybe they notice that they're struggling, there's stress or anxiety, there's building, but it hasn't really developed to be a crisis yet. Is there a way they can get a hold of us and start gaining access to some of those resources?
I encourage that. It's always good to be proactive. And I think during the COVID times, you have to be proactive about your mental health. It's not something you can kind of take for granted or just kind of hope exists. So yeah, I love it when people somehow get my number. I'm happy to give that out and be a resource for people who just have questions. my role tends to be, I don't give ongoing care to individuals like a therapist would, a private therapist would, but I am there to consult and point people in the right direction. And so our numbers are always available. Calling non-emergency dispatch is, the non-emergency number is probably the easiest way. I don't know if you want to, I can give my number now. I don't know how many people that it would reach, but my number is 303-658-4271. So anybody in the community of, the city of Westminster can call and reach out.
What about the walk-up clinic?
The walk-in clinic is another way for somebody who's in a crisis, but doesn't have to be a full-fledged crisis. I think there's a misconception that you have to be suicidal or out of control. And actually, that's less preferable. We want you to get help before you get to that point. And the walk-in crisis center, which is located, on Bryant and 84th, pretty close to Federal and 84th, is a great option for people who just need to stop in and talk to somebody. It's available 24/7 and staffed by very capable clinicians.
So that location is in the St. Anthony's Hospital, right there off of 84th and Bryant. It's on the west side of the building. It's walk-up clinic or walk-in clinic?
Yeah, it's a walk-in clinic. It goes in by a couple different names. It's a crisis center or the behavioral health urgent care is what's on the awning. That's pretty much what it is.
And in addition, I mean, there's always, the suicide prevention. There's mental health hotlines out there that we can certainly post those numbers for resources. And there's always someone there answering those lines too. Like Nora said, we'd much rather you call ahead of time and speak with somebody to prevent you getting further down a crisis rabbit hole, so to speak, than to be in a full-fledged crisis. We'd like to get you those resources. And again, Nora mentioned, they're here to de-escalate and stabilize in the initial crisis, and then you'll move on to, or the person would move on to a more set clinician, therapist atmosphere, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we're available for future crises. I mean, even if you're in treatment and you have another crisis, if it fits the bill of things getting out of control, you feeling like you need external support in order to stay safe, then we're definitely still available to respond.
So we've got a question from Barbara Carba, and we've asked her to unmute, and I'll just preface the question that gives her time to join this conversation about resources for individuals who don't have insurance, or what source do we have to help in that capacity?
Sure, and I think one of the resources is us. I mean, there's no fee for co-responders. So if you're in a crisis, you don't have to worry about getting a bill. And I think that's so good because that's the last thing someone should have to worry about. I actually help people get, if they don't have insurance but can qualify for Medicaid. I have a person I speak to who's actually located at the emergency room who can help people get on Medicaid. So that's a resource I have for people who may be indigent but not yet have Medicaid or recently have qualified for that. Community Reach Center offers sliding scale too for people who have fewer resources. Depending on that person's situation, there may be a grant available. If that person is a victim, or if that person has some special circumstances, sometimes there's funds available that we know about.
That's fantastic, thank you. She did respond that she doesn't have a mic that's working, so maybe you can touch on one other question that talks about community stabilization. I think from a law enforcement perspective, we have some calls where we frequent a home or deal with an individual who is struggling with some of this. So how does a co-responder program help in that stabilization and create a little more of an advocate to help more in a long term, which would reduce the need for police or law enforcement to be in somebody's home more frequently?
I can respond to that. I think a lot of times what happens once we establish that relationship, and oftentimes it does start with police contact, because that's that's the way that the person knows how to get help oftentimes. But I've been getting more and more direct calls for people who are in crisis, who want to bypass the police or just want to consult about, hey, how do we calm this situation down? Or can you talk to my loved one who's in crisis over the phone, or can you respond? And if I've been to a setting and I know it's safe, and then I can respond by myself, and I'll always let dispatch know, and so that people know where I am. But that's a resource. Or I can respond and then, if necessary, call police if it turns into more of a mental health hold situation.
I think that's a perfect example that Nora just gave of what we intend for this program to do. So people who are in mental health crisis or have loved ones, they're reaching out to her and not the police, which is ideal, correct? We want them to get the resources and the opportunities and have that connection and ability to speak with someone in that field. Because police officers, I certainly don't have the letters after my name that Nora has after hers, and spending the time in school that she did to get those certifications. And that's important for our community members who do have those mental health crises, because we know that mental health is not just a one-day thing. Sure, some depression and things like that, but some of these larger scale, mental health issues are ongoing, not only for the person, but for the family. And so the fact that they can develop the relationships with our clinicians and not call the police is absolutely what we want this program to do. And then in essence, it allows the police to go out and to respond to those criminal calls that we need to handle, whether they be the burglary or the motor vehicle theft, and allows us and frees us up to deal with those calls, which Emily's not equipped to respond to. So that's exactly what we wanted our program to do, and hope that continues to do here in Westminster.
Absolutely. Sherry, you mentioned earlier that sometimes just because of the uniform, the officer that responds doesn't even have an opportunity to start that engagement, that de-escalation, that conversation, because the uniform, some occasions, just kind of stirs with fear or some type of response that makes it more difficult for us to de-escalate, to get this person some of the resources that are truly going to help. So fantastic response. I really appreciate that. Westminster is such a diverse community. I'm going to shift to focus a little bit in, we have a lot of people that are Spanish speaking. We have a large Latino population that are Spanish speaking as their primary language. And we have obviously many other families that speak different languages. And what resources do we have, or how do we handle those calls? Because they too suffer from crisis sometimes.
So from the police side, we obviously have the language line, which officers can access and use to communicate with that person. We call the number, and I forget how many languages there are, but there's well over 100 different interpreters that we can get so that we can communicate with the person who may be in crisis. So that's our number one resource when we have a language barrier is the language line.
And we have a similar language line as well that we can use over our cell phones. And I know there's also a few Spanish speaking officers too that can help.
So language should not be a barrier to reaching out for help with mental health or any type of issues, substance abuse issues, because we have those resources to get the information from you and back to you, so that we can help you in those situations.
From a police perspective, so if we're talking about internal, what are some of the feedback that we're hearing from our officers? This is a new program for our community, and the focus is there, but we don't want to lose sight that it creates a tremendous benefit to those men and women that serve in that police capacity and are handling calls. So Sherry, what's some of the feedback that we're getting from our people?
Well, I think that, we give them this 40-hour course, and again, it pales in comparison to the education and training that our co-responders have. So they have just the tip of the iceberg, and they have just enough to be able to get people resources, but it's a relief to know that someone's in crisis and they need help, and we now have a way to get them help through our co-responders and our clinicians. I sit and listen on day shift, and you guys are constantly busy. The officers are constantly calling for them. I know that that they're running from call to call a lot of times. So the officers are using them. They're grateful for them. We didn't know how it was going to work out in the beginning, quite honestly. I mean, this is a fairly new idea and new program. We've had a lot of other departments reach out to us because our program is so successful thus far and growing. And I think the officers love having the option to have someone help them in something that they know isn't a crime, and how to get them help. Because before, our options are limited, right? We could put them in jail on the crime, knowing that possibly the mental illness is what contributed to that. Or we might be able to articulate enough to place them on a mental health hold and get them into a facility where they could get some help. But that kind of is the limit of our resources at the time, whereas our clinicians have a lot more resources. So the officers are using the resources that they have and constantly calling for the clinicians.
Yeah, that's certainly what I hear from a supervisor perspective is our officers want more. And they like to hear that the department is really working hard to look at how we expand and develop and grow. We certainly are taking advantage of Emily and Nora in the capacity that they are super busy. So we have Jenna Gutierrez who's joined us. We've unmuted you so she can ask her question.
Hello. You said that at the beginning of the program that you received a grant, and I'm just wondering how you anticipate future funding for this program to go. Where are those funds going to come from?
Sarge, can you speak to that?
So I don't have the full background. That's a fantastic question. It's an expensive program. I want to say the grant was about $500,000. I'm going to ask if Commander Hendershot can shoot me a little bit of background information on that. And part of that is to recognize how to develop it. In part, there's funding that we want to or need to develop as an internal component within the budget of the police department. But one of those that's a little indirect is the partnerships that are created with these other resources in our community that specialize in mental health, that can partner with us, provide long-term options and other things. So that's a great question, Jenna. Give me just a minute and we'll get you a little more clarity in that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
One thing that I wanted to mention from earlier when I was kind of giving you an overview is, again, we started this program in July of 2020. Make sure I have my dates right there. Got a little bit of COVID fog, like Sarge said, but our behavioral crisis is how we kind of code these calls in our CAD system, in our dispatch system. And from July until the end of the year, so about, 5 months, our co-responders had responded on 647 calls. And I think that's telling. There's 2 of them, so they're busy. They responded on a lot of calls last year, and I don't think that that's necessarily just a product of COVID. We all know that, COVID was tough to get through for all of us with our mental health. We got kind of shut down from doing our normal daily activities from our families and friends. We went to working from home and being isolated. Sure, that all played a part in all of our mental health and receiving that support. But I think that you're going to see those numbers continue to increase and climb, and they're going to stay busy. So I think that's a phenomenal number for 2 people to handle, and shows just how much needed the program was in our city.
And it does look like that $500,000 grant is accurate. That's approximately how much that grant was. There is an option for extension. I do know just on a very surface level that we have provided and received some great feedback. We've implemented the grant and our co-responder just in a little different version than some of the others, and it's had tremendous benefit. So part of that is learning and growing and providing other departments with some of the success story in Westminster. I know that grant is state funded through the Office of Behavioral Health, Westminster was not the only department that was awarded that grant. So after that extension period, the department and the city will have to look at other options for funding. It's one of those considerations that will come in time, that may be something that's budgeted, so funds or revenues that are collected by the city of Westminster that go to the police department budget could be potentially done through that, through additional grant funding. The federal government offers grants on a various number of things that municipalities like the city can apply for. And I don't know specifically about mental health grants, but we would look at all the various options to identify what resources we have to continue to grow and develop the co-responder program from here. We had another question come in that Parker Brown has asked, so let me jump over and unmute Parker so that he can ask.
Yeah, can you hear me, Trevor?
Absolutely. Hi, Parker.
Oh, so my question, we're talking about, and I know that's kind of off topic, but what type of resources and training are out there for our officers, especially after like big calls that affect them mentally?
I think you cut out just a little bit, Parker. If I understand, you want to know what kind of support that officers receive after critical calls, or just on a daily basis, what kind of?
No, after critical calls that can affect them mentally, you know, their state of mental health.
So that is a huge component of our department, and we recently, within the last year or two, contracted with our, let me think of the name here.
Brower Psychological.
Thank you. Brower Psychological, who is our police psychologist. So officers can go for 3 visits initially. Just show up at the office, make the appointment, go in and have a conversation. That information does not get reported back to the department. If the clinicians decide that we need more time, more sessions, they will call the department and say, hey, we need 5 more sessions, and usually those are granted. So it's very much, we want the officers to seek the resource. That's why it's confidential. The department is vested in the officer's mental health so that we reach out and use that resource confidentially. We can obviously go to our clinicians and ask for resources. We develop friendships and relationships working with them. So if I was struggling with, say, hey, Nora, I've been depressed lately, do you have somebody that I could go see, or a number I can call if I feel comfortable doing that? In addition, after any type of critical incident, we're required to go see the psychologist by the department. So if we have, for instance, if many of you are familiar with our dentistry shooting a couple of summers ago, every officer who was involved in that was required to go see our police psychologist. And then we do a debrief in-house as well with our peers, because we've known from military veterans returning that when they sit down and they debrief and they talk about a critical incident or a situation, that helps process the information. Because maybe I'm having trouble sleeping and I think I'm the only one, but I sit down with the other officers who were involved in that incident. Yeah, I'm not sleeping real well. Oh, thank goodness, I'm normal. I'm experiencing the same types of things. So there's plenty of resources and options for the officers to get help and required to get help. Some more of our detectives that handle like our child sex crimes, they're required to see the psychologist twice a year to check their mental health and their status and make sure that they're still functioning, you know, and in a good place mentally after seeing those types of crimes. So the department is vested in our mental health and making sure that we receive the support that we need if we need it.
Yeah, Parker, I'm just going to chime in a little bit too, Sherry. That's a fantastic question. It kind of merges from what we were just talking about a moment ago that Jessica asked about funding. It's really important to know that the city of Westminster is tremendously invested and recognizes that there are significant costs to mental health, and they're committed to that. That's part of where the co-responder program comes. Conversely, I think your question is starting to delve into our mental health, the mental health of the officer that goes to calls for service, and unfortunately on a regular basis where there is trauma. And maybe it's not a crisis, a critical incident, something really substantial, but it's compounding. It builds, and the longer you're an officer, the more you're exposed to. It might be a tragic traffic accident where a small child is injured, or a fatal traffic accident where there's some relationship that the officer feels that they have a child or a family member, and they can start to personalize that and start to relate to that. So one, it's important for us to recognize that our co-responder program is dedicated to our citizens, and the police department has a very robust program for our staff. We try to keep those two separate. Our officers may get comfortable with the co-responders and lean on a little bit of that expertise, but we really want to direct them to those resources that are specifically dedicated to law enforcement, in part public safety. So firefighters, paramedics, police officers deal with trauma different than a lot of members of our community. So we want somebody who very specialized training and resources. For example, Broward Psychological focuses on law enforcement and public safety individuals, so they may see things that may be able to help in resources. The city, for all city employees outside of the police and fire department, have an employee assistance program that is to help provide resources for employees that are struggling with stress and anxiety and mental health and coping skills and depression, all of those things. We are human. We are not immune to all of those same types of things. To the contrary, we experience them sometimes more than others because the job is stressful, it's traumatic, and we need resources. We have a very good peer support team that's led by a group that are, again, then trained in kind of intervening with the officers and individuals. I shouldn't say officers. I need to recognize that a critical call that a dispatcher is tethered to a phone but can't see or be there or experience, there's tremendous trauma for our dispatchers. Sherry had mentioned that active shooter at the dental office. We had dispatchers that had to receive that call, a very traumatic call that has lasting effects. So we have a peer support program. In place, we have an early warning system where supervisors are going to monitor an individual's behavior to see if there's things that are starting to occur that maybe they're not an intentional thing. It's a judgment or decision that is not intended to be poor, but because of some type of stress or trauma they're dealing with, or potentially they're not dealing with because of some of the labels that are put on the profession as a weakness. If you want to ask for help, we're overcoming a lot of that. So the Parker, the question that you asked, gosh, we could probably sit here for an hour and talk just about it, but I can't highlight enough. For example, as a supervisor who has been part of several critical incidents or officer-involved shootings, the department has provided tremendous support and resource to me to be able to go talk to experts about, as a supervisor, how do I help my officers? How do I help the people that I supervise? How do I, as a supervisor, maybe respond to, recognize, change, and become more aware of some of those nuances? So fantastic question. What other, we still have you unmuted. What other questions does that stir for you?
I mean, that pretty much answered kind of what I was thinking. You know, because I know we're talking about the public side of things, you know, but to me, we have to, you know, kind of go both directions.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point, Parker. You know, historically, like I mentioned, in law enforcement, we don't talk about mental health, and in society in general, right? We're overcoming that stigma, and it's becoming more front and center. And like I mentioned, I come from a family of police officers. My dad wouldn't talk about mental health as far as the calls that he responded on because they didn't recognize it as an issue. So while I think we've come a long ways, that we still have work to do. And you're absolutely right. It's not only the citizens that we serve, but we have to take care of ourselves, because if we can't take care of ourselves and our own mental health, then we're going to be of no good to anybody in the community either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So it looks like we're getting close. We have about 5 minutes left. I don't see any questions left in the questions or on our poll. So we do, if there's anybody out there that has a question and we haven't got to you or we haven't seen it, please send us a chat or throw that in the question real quick. And Sherry or Nora, does anything stand out as we want to wrap up? Or
I just think that, you know, if you guys have questions or there's issues or concerns come up, please reach out to us. We're doing all of these sessions, not that just this one, but to get information out to you guys, to let you know what we're working on, the programs, to address, you know, some of the things that you see in the news or hear from the Nextdoor app. Not just this session, but anything. If there's a topic that you're passionate about that you want more information on, we would love to sit and spend an hour or half hour with you. If it's specific to your neighborhood, we'll do it with your neighborhood. I think it's just really important that COVID, one of the nice things that it created for us, if there can be a nice thing, is the ability to create these virtual platforms and the ability to speak with our community and talk to you about what you want to know and answer your questions. So please reach out to us and let us know. It's important that you guys know what we're doing to serve you.
yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of conversations since COVID about what we don't know, that there's been this kind of lockdown where people feel a little bit trapped and they're a little more reluctant to go out, even if restrictions change and that kind of thing. So we have been very in tune in talking about what depression looks like, what suicide looks like, and some of those impacts. And we certainly are doing our best to try to identify some of that prior to. Suicide is such a tragic thing. So we want everybody to know, and those that are in attendance tonight, we do ask that you share that, share the resources, share the information that you've learned. If you can get others to be passionate, enthusiastic about talking about the co-responder program, taking the stigma away from some of those things, that has such benefit. I think we all may know somebody or a situation, a circumstance where we can maybe reflect on it and say, hey, there's some good information here. So we just appreciate everybody that was joining us tonight. And I just want to give one quick look through the questions, make sure we haven't missed anybody. We have a couple people have thrown in there as we come to a close, just a thank you to us. And we always appreciate that salute to appreciate the police officers and the sacrifice and service they do. So those are always encouraging. It's just been a great thing through COVID that so many people are coming into the lobby and sharing their thanks and appreciation for law enforcement, and that goes a long way. It's a difficult time for the officers to work through some of these problems and limitations. So we appreciate that. I don't see anything else, and I think we're right there at about 7 o'clock. So we just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is fantastic. If you have any questions, you have our emails or our phone numbers, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, thank you and have a great night.
Thanks for spending some time with us tonight.